Okay, welcome everybody. This week we have a wonderful topic that we want to discuss with all of you, and that is regarding stewards and stewarding, which is a very difficult job. I usually say that the stewards work a lot harder than the judges. They come earlier, they leave later. And we have two wonderful persons with us that you all know very well. But so I don't want to make this boring. Just as an introduction, I would like to say that I'm very thankful that the USDF has decided to partner with us, and now it's uploading all these chats on their website. So I'm just thrilled with that. I'm very, very happy. And without further talk, because I'm sure you don't want to hear me, but you want to hear our guests, I'm going to start sharing the screen where Lisa Gorretta, president of USDF, has prepared a wonderful presentation for us. So the idea is that we will follow this presentation, and without further comments, I would like to go straight to the topic. So I will start with Lisa, and I would like to ask Lisa and Joelle the same question. When did you decide to become an FEI steward, and how was the journey to become an FEI steward?
Well, before we begin, I have to give full credit to the presentation, and I requested the presentation, but I got my good friend Jean Krause, who's a level 3 steward from the US, to actually put it together because she's far better at doing these things than I. So I have to thank her for, I gave her a very quick outline and then she put it together for us. So thank you, Jean. I've been a national dressage official for the United States for about 35 years. And we're a little weird because both the dressage and eventing call our national officials technical delegates. And then when we go to the FEI, we become stewards, and then there's a whole other position that's a technical delegate. So we start out by confusing people right from the beginning. But I started as a dressage TD about 35 years ago, and at the time, actually, I think I probably started it because eventually I thought I wanted to be a judge, which I never pursued. But about 10 years ago, I think probably, or 15, people said, you should really be an FEI steward. So at the time, I did not think there was really enough work available in the United States for me, so I put it off for quite a while. But about 12 years ago, I started my pathway in as an FEI official. I started at the time where you went right in as a level 2, and then you could eventually become a level 3. Right in that process, they added the level 1 stewarding concept, which is the very basic, more limited responsibility. You can't be the chief steward at an event. So I made my way through 2, and then I was very fortunate that I worked a lot as a deputy with Elizabeth Williams, who is our Steward General for dressage in the US. And then a year before last, I got my level 3 and did my first chiefing at a championship, which was the Pan Am Games in Lima. Joelle, we met at Rio, but you'd obviously been going before that, and you are multidisciplined.
So Joelle, can you tell us about your journey?
Yeah, for sure. I was representing Luxembourg on international competitions as a rider up to WEC 2006 in Aachen. And then 2009, my horse was 16 and I decided to quit the big competitions. And then afterwards it was like, okay, you have been in this for so long, what can you do now? And then everybody expected me to be a judge. For sure, you can do that, you're a teacher, you have seen a lot of competitions. Come on, let's go to be a judge. So I started, I did all these exams, but very quickly discovered that's not my part of the game. As a teacher, I'm judging people all day long. So in my free time, I want to do something different. And then I discovered stewarding. And so I did the exam in 2012. I was very lucky then afterwards because I could go immediately to Caen 2014. I had the Europeans in Aachen 2015, and then Rio, where Lisa and Elizabeth and me, we met for the first time. And 2017 Gothenburg, 2018 Rhine. Yes, this year would have been Tokyo, but perhaps next year.
So,
Yeah, so that,
let me ask
yeah.
you a question. Since you were a writer before, I didn't know that. Have your perception about stewards changed from when you were a writer up to now?
To be honest, I think at that time, or perhaps it was my perception of it, that stewarding, they were not that present at that time as they are now. I didn't really realize that we had stewards around. And I think we still have a lot of riders. They don't realize that there are stewards around all day long, from 6 o'clock in the morning until 10 o'clock in the evening.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So as I was telling before, the stewards are the first one to arrive to the horse show, even before the horses arrive. You have to be there to help with the organizing committee to have everything in place. So Lisa, I would like to ask you, how is the first approach to the FEI show once you arrive? What are the things that you have to do?
Well, there's some communication from the OC in the beginning before you even arrive. So the first communication you really have with the competition is the definite schedule. So part of the steward's responsibility is the adherence of the competition to that schedule. So when you arrive, you have certain expectations of the stabling, what the schedule will be, how the office will run, what the organizer's plans are. So once you arrive on the grounds, before ideally this opening of the stables, those are the first things that you're checking to see that the message board is in place and all of the correct officials' names and phone numbers are there, that the open portion of the stable and the arrival arrangements for the horses are in good order and safe for everyone. And at that point, once, according to the definite schedule, which of course all of the riders and their teams have not looked at so that they know what time they may arrive at the grounds, then you begin to start with the first arrival of the veterinary team to do the first arrival inspection of the horses.
Okay, and then Joelle, let me ask you a question. We have riders and we have judges and we have also stewards. When do the riders and the judges should be aware of all the rules that the stewards have to apply? Is that upon arrival of the horses, or the rules only apply after the jog is done, or the rules only applied once your warm-up start? Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, for sure. It's the official opening of the stables. From that moment on, you have all the rules in place.
Okay, so is there any advice that you should give to the riders once they arrive with the horses and trailers, what they should be worried about, what precautions they should take so that they don't have problems with the stewards? What are the main things you would say? Lisa, you can go ahead with that.
Okay.
Yeah, ready.
Okay, I'll start. Well, ideally, as I've mentioned once, and we'll probably mention several more times while we talk together so that hopefully it will stay, is if the riders and the transportation people know from the beginning what the official time of the opening of the stables is. No one should be on the grounds with a horse prior to the official opening time, because that's when everyone is prepared and ready for your arrival. The way to get on the good side of the steward right away is to make sure that you pay attention to the way you unload your horses and your equipment into the stables. Of course, the stables are open at that point. No horse should go into the stabling area until the veterinarians have given permission and have identified the horse and checked the temperature and read the microchip, ideally, and checked that the vaccinations are in order before any horse enters the stable. Because, of course, one of the things that we are concerned about is the health and safety and welfare of all the horses. And once there is a problem in the stable area, then we end up doing cleanup, and that's not what we would prefer to do. Joelle, do you want to go from there?
Yeah, I think I saw it. It was my first time in Wellington this year, that you're very well organized over there upon the arrival stories. In Europe, it's less common. So normally we first check the horses when we see them in the jog. And I'm not very happy about that, I must say. There, you are really much better organized than we are for the moment. I hope that this will improve in Europe, because it's so important, especially with all the illness and influenza and all these stories we have going around. So it's really important.
So I have a question here. You mentioned that it's very important not to arrive before. So then what happens if you arrive after the prescribed time? Is there any sanction for that, or what would happen?
Well, every competition is different. As Joelle said, some are more organized than others. Certainly the ones that are the largest, and therefore they have to be very well organized for the United States, are the ones that happen in Florida because they are so large. Many times I do a competition that's a little smaller. It's important to not arrive to the party early. If you are fashionably late, it's not such a problem unless, of course, you have missed the time when that first veterinary inspection is going and it has to be rescheduled. That's a good way to get on the unhappy side of the show office when they're trying to get credentials out in proper order and get wristbands. And if you arrive after the jog, then you get to say hello to all of your friends before you have unloaded, and then you get to take your horses home.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so I have another question. Some riders think that they will only see the stewards and they only have to comply with the rules while they are warming up or competing. But certainly there are many other areas that you're always present. So, and especially the barns and where the lorries are. Could you tell us what rules of behavior the riders and trainers should have in all those areas?
I think for me something very important, and we are still going behind that, is putting the names of the owners and phone numbers on the boxes of the horses, because it's so difficult for us. We are present in the stables, we have night stewards, and they are really, really looking after these horses, trying to take care and to see if the horses are well. But when we don't have a phone number to call somebody, when there's an ill horse or something is going wrong, we can't help. And this is something I don't understand the riders. Why don't they just put the phone number there? We will not give them away or whatever, but it's so important. Sometimes it's about a minute to help and just let us call you. So that's really something very important for me.
Yeah, I think it's, both for our national competitions and for some people, not everyone, but for some people at the international competitions, the steward is seen kind of as the policeman and someone that you want to make sure never sees you. And you're only not in trouble when you do not see the steward. That's our responsibility is the welfare of the horse and the overall level playing field of competition for everyone in every aspect of that competition. So typically as the competitor or the groom or the trainer, you have to remember that once you arrive at the CDI, you should not be anywhere where there is no steward. You should not graze where there's outside the area, and that the map is extremely important to look at when you first arrive so that you know the access and route to the stabling. Once the stabling is secure, what the access route is to the lunging and the grazing and the exercising and the warm-up and the competition ring. Those are the places you can go. And if it's not on the map as to where you should go, you should not go, basically. When the barn opens in the morning, that's the arrival time for the support team and eventually the rider. And it's extremely important to look at the official board and know when the schooling time is, because before the schooling time, the horse should not leave the barn. And then it should go directly to the schooling time, and the steward ideally is there. If the steward is not there, you should not start. And if the steward is there, we always like to have the exchange of pleasantries of good mornings, because we want to know that the riders are good and comfortable, the horses are properly cared for, that the accommodations for the grooms, if there are any problems that anyone, we're there as we're all part of the team to make this competition run well. So we want to know if there are problems. Unfortunately, sometimes we only know about the problems when you've offended some other competitor or groom, and then they come right away and tell us about the problems. But we would really like to know in the first person that everything is going well for the competition. That is part of our role, and it's very important for us.
Yeah, definitely.
I would like to ask about accreditations. Or I'm sorry, Joelle, did you want to say something? Go ahead.
Just about going everywhere with the horses, where you're allowed to go always with the head numbers, because that's always,
Yes.
we're running around and trying to tell them that they have to wear the head numbers as soon as they leave the stables. It's so important for us so that we can identify the horses. It's very important.
That's a very good point, and that's very important in all CDIs. So my other question was regarding the identifications or the credentials that are given to riders, to trainers, to grooms, to owners, and
The list is very long. Yes.
Is there anything, and I know that we've had recently some problems in some of the CDIs in Florida. So would you like to comment about how to handle those accreditations, what's important to do, what you definitely cannot do, and what are you supposed to if you break those rules?
Well, again, Florida is in some respects, because of its size, a little more organized. Many competitions that I do are still operating strictly with the colored wristbands, which for the most part works pretty well, unless of course you choose to take your wristband off and give it to someone else who is not authorized. If you have the equipment, certainly at championships, but also just in Florida and in California, the photo ID is a wonderful addition. So when you get your accreditation and you've told the competition secretary how many identifications you need for your support staff, particularly when there is a photo involved, it is the chances of you being able to give that photo away to someone else to gain access once the stabling is secure is really fairly minimal, and yet every year it seems that someone tries that. And it's an odd thing because the security of the stabling is set up for the horses and the horse welfare. And if you are not the one who is messing with the access, then you understand that, because it could be the impact of your horse, either something as bad as the horse getting something it should not have, intentionally or unintentionally. It could be a comparatively smaller situation where equipment is missing or something is not as it should be in the stabling. But it's really for the rider's welfare and the horse's welfare. So it's, as stewards, we're always a little mystified as to why this is a problem, but it is certainly a wonderful way to be introduced to the yellow card warning, or worse. And no one would like to have a yellow card, but it's funny, it's once the stabling is secure, before the stabling is secure, you bring everything in, you load it, you put it where it belongs. Afterwards, when you forget something in your lorry, that is not the time to go and either cut the fence or throw it over the top. Someone will almost always see that, and then they are very interested in where the stewards are. And of course, as stewards, we're never where we're supposed to be at the time that we're needed, but we do try. But those are the important things with credentials. If it's at the end of the day, if someone in your party, and you are the rider, if someone in your party does things with credentials to have access to other people, at the end of the day, it's the person responsible that gets it. So
that's very important. And the person responsible is the rider of the horse, right?
Yes. Correct.
That's something that not everybody is aware of. It was the only yellow card I gave until now was because the groom gave his accreditation to somebody else, and And then the rider got the yellow card and she was in tears. She didn't understand it at the beginning. Afterwards, she apologized and everything. But
Sure.
yes, it's really important to know that you are the person responsible as a rider for your whole team.
Yes.
Okay, so certainly the stewards are there to help the riders. So my next question is: do you feel bad when riders come and start asking questions about everything, or you rather have them asking that breaking the rules?
I only feel bad when I have to tell them they've broken a rule that they could have avoided, because if they'd just spoken to the stewards. And again, we're all part of the team of making the event successful. So we should not come across as people who we do not want them to talk to us or ask questions. But I think there is an authority stigma with stewards that no steward that I know tries to have, but it just seems to be something that follows us around. Joelle, I don't know if you have a different.
No, it's perfect for me. You know, our motto is help, prevent, and intervene. So, and if they ask you about rules and you're not supposed to know them all by heart, but you can tell them, just give me a moment, I'll look it up for you, and then everybody is fine.
Yes, well, there are far too many rules to know by heart.
Definitely.
Okay, there is a bullet here in these PowerPoint presentations that talks about accepted behavior. I would like you to elaborate a little bit on that. Is that behavior towards the horse only, or does that include the owner of the horse, the trainer, the press, other competitors, the public? What is that? What is this of accepted behavior, and how riders should prepare for that?
I think everyone in their role, whether it's the rider or the groom or the trainer or the judge or the spectator or the press, should all know both their boundaries and that we are all there to have good sport and ideally have a good impression on the part of the public of our sport. So anytime anyone is acting in an unsportsmanlike way, then they should probably question their own behavior.
So may I follow on that? For instance, if I'm a rider and I have a trainer that is yelling at me obscene words, you know, and there's no way to stop the trainer, could I, as a person responsible, as the rider, have a yellow card because of the behavior of my trainer?
I have to think about that one for a second. I would say if the trainer is yelling at his own rider, he is or she is outside the boundaries of acceptable behavior. And if someone else does not complain about it, as a steward, because I have a fairly probably narrow band of what is acceptable behavior compared to, because I'm older, I might take the opportunity to have a quiet chat with the trainer. If, as a rider, my trainer is abusive or obstructionist to some other competitor, then the trainer, as one listed as part of that entry, can have a problem, but it would be unusual for the rider themselves to get a yellow card based upon their trainers. I've never run into that. Joelle, you may have.
No, not really. No. And I think
there are some situations where you are the person responsible, but you're not responsible for the inappropriate actions of your trainer.
Okay.
Yes,
so
I think
that
might be something then to be handled by the organizer, accreditation gone or something like that. And we had it once that the police had to come because
Yes.
stewards and organizers couldn't do anything about it. So there's a limit for everything. So
Yeah, it's a little different for stewards. You know, if you are the president of the ground jury, then you know that oftentimes issues are brought to your attention. When you are the steward, certainly when you are on the stewarding team and you come across a situation that is not right, it's your responsibility to investigate it to the best of your ability. At that point, then you report it to your chief. Once the chief steward has been advised of something, depending upon the level of competition, they will be speaking to the organizer and the president of the ground jury and the foreign judge, or if it's a medical issue, to the veterinary delegate. But stewards do not make the competition. We try to make the competition run better. So oftentimes our role is thoroughly investigating a situation and then reporting it up the food chain.
Okay, here I have a question from the audience. Can you yellow card a trainer or only the PR? Or have you had that case?
Joelle, have you had one?
No, not really, no.
It is possible. Yellow cards are for situations that are less than something that should go directly into the FEI legal system generally. So it would depend upon what the situation is.
Shut up, you dumb horny fucking bit.
Okay. That's why they have passwords on Zoom calls. So it's I have only given a yellow card to the person responsible, but I've had a couple situations that have gone past the yellow card that I've just moved right on past my area of responsibility that's gone into the FEI tribunal.
Okay. And do you have any experiences with that, Joelle?
Until now, no, I must say, I never had a situation. Especially not in dressage. Dressage people are very easy to handle normally. No, never had that. I think I only had some competitions as chief until now, so hopefully it will not happen.
Okay, then I want to go to one issue that we all worry about, and that is abuse. And of course, we're all against horse abuse. But then there are some fine lines. How do you decide when those fine lines are being watched? And there's a lot of criticism from the press at times that the stewards are not strong enough, and then sometimes the writers would say otherwise, and so like the stewards are too strong. So what would you like to say about that?
It's, you know, I remember doing a forum when we were talking about abuse. It was a stewards forum. We were talking about abuse, and the statement was made that you know abuse when you see it. And to a certain extent, that is
I want to come in your pussy.
That's why it is important to have stewards that are horsemen, so that they understand what is and what is not acceptable behavior towards the horse. I am always hesitant when I see a moment in time because, for example, a still photograph can be a blink of an eye. But when I'm watching a warm-up in particular,
go shove that dildo up your pussy and fucking moan for me, Lisa.
A clashing of age that goes on, a horse that is in an antagonistic training position for a number of minutes, that is certainly when one has to look at whether your eye or someone not familiar with the sport would look at the situation and be concerned.
Yeah, I think that's it. I was stewarding for several years in Aachen. So Aachen is very special about that. You have the public all around and very close to the warming up. And it's a very special situation for the stewards there. And for me personally, I use my riding experience, my feeling. When I watch somebody warming up to horse, and I can see the intention behind what he's doing. Mm-hmm. And as long as I can follow it, then it's okay for me. But when it gives me a bad stomach feeling, then it's the moment to say, okay, now we watch it closely, and perhaps we go to the trainer and talk to them. But that's why we really need horse people as stewards, so that they can see the difference. What is going on there? What are they doing? What is the attention behind? Very important, I think.
Good. So before we go on, I just want to apologize. We probably had somebody very obnoxious in, or some hacker, but I already managed to get that person out. So I hope we don't have any problems anymore. So now let's go to two issues. One is the tight drop noseband, and how tight is tight, and how can you work with that? A lot of people is using those pads so there is a space in between the cheekbones. And then the other issue is roll cord. So would you two like to comment about that? How do you handle that? What are the rules? And how is it working nowadays in practice?
Well, for a long time, the FEI rules were rather instructive, but not specific about the tightness of nosebands. And the wording was always, it may never be so tight as to harm the horse. In 2016, about 3 weeks before Rio, was the first time that the FEI came out with a very specific standard for checking noseband tightness. And that was for the FEI, one finger could be inserted on the side of the cavesson. And they also added a specific plan for checking of cavesons in particular prior to the competition. And that was the first time that they specified that the steward that is doing equipment check should also be available to monitor the warm-up and the exercising. So that if a noseband in particular was checked and was considered to be very tight, that steward should mention it to the competitor, and then that same steward should be checking that competition, not the entire competition, but that competition, so that the check would be the same, it would be in the same place, and it would be by the same fingers. And then at that time, if it was still too tight, the chief steward may issue a warning card. So I think that was, so 2016 to me was really the first time that the FEI recognized that it was a problem, and they needed to be able to give stewards in particular tools to deal with it. So now there is a lot more specific checking, I think. Yes, you mentioned the pads, and to a certain extent, yes, those pads can be used to add cushion to a noseband, and yes, they can be used in order to try and get around the check after the ride. I think that most stewards have gotten a little more clever than that, so they can figure out if that's the issue. And there is a lot more of an emphasis on whether or not there are any additional materials inside the cavesson. So a lot of those pads get removed in the check. I think that we are better about it. I think there are probably still some that are too tight. I don't think I'm an aggressive steward in any way, but I think some riders probably consider me a little overzealous in the equipment checking department. But that's, while I'm not an expert, I think I'm probably a specialist because I was involved in that end of the industry as a tack shop owner for 25 years. I think it's better. I don't think it's gone. I think the changes in bridle manufacture in the last few years in many respects have made it better, and then probably in some respects have made it a little worse. But the checking of the tack is extremely important. It's one of the biggest frustrations to me as a steward, as a competition. And for this, I blame the riders and the grooms, I guess, is that there should be no reason that a horse cannot have his equipment checked. They're afraid of the gloves. This is a perfect time while we're all dealing with this virus and we have to stay home and we're dealing with masks and gloves. This is the time to take the pair of gloves and do everything with your horse with gloves on so that they're not so afraid of them, because I don't think that most of the stewards are particularly scary. And it's really something that our competition horses could be trained to deal with. I don't know if you have, Joelle?
Yeah, I must say, for me, Lisa is the amazing job doing that and checking the bits, because we did it together in Rio and Tryon for all the dressage horses. And it was just amazing. I learned so much from you there, really. And I think we have less and less problems with tight nosebands. And you remember we had our little private statistics about tight nosebands.
Mm-hmm.
And in Rio, what we discovered were that those who were told that the nosebands were quite tight didn't make it through to the freestyle. And we had the same in Tryon. It might be a deal to have kind of statistics about it, and after several years show it to the riders to tell them, you see, tight nosebands, they don't get you anywhere, definitely.
Yeah.
And it might be an idea to ask if it's not possible to check the nosebands upon arrival on the warming up, like we do it in jumping, because I also level 2 in jumping with the hind boots. So we check it upon arrival in the warming up, and afterwards they're not allowed to touch it again, unless they come to see us, and then they can fix it or something. It might be an idea, I don't know.
Yeah. And not to give away a steward's secret, but if one or two horses out, we see the horse go to the far end of the warm-up, and then they spend a lot of time around the horse's face, you'd be surprised how often that attracts our attention and makes us wonder just how tight that noseband is going to be. And of course, it's in our national competitions, unless it's a championship, we only check 1/3 of the horses, but you can certainly imagine those would be right in there with the ones we would check. In the international competitions, they're all going to be checked. I do think, again, it's an opportunity for the horseman's background and the steward to know little things like, when the horses just come out of the ring, and sometimes they're really pumped up. If you allow the horse a moment to settle and get comfortable with his surroundings, sometimes you find that what you anticipated was going to be a very tight noseband really isn't. Once the horse takes a breath and relaxes and his moment in the ring, some horses really get hyped up when they're in the ring. So you have to be a little good about that. But at the same time, if equipment is too tight or there is a problem with the equipment, the stewards are not hesitant to point it out. You asked about roll call. That goes back to our watching the warm up. And again, as Joelle said, you watch the warm up with the desire to understand what is going on behind the training. If a horse is in, and we use terms like long, deep, long and low. If a horse is, to me, exuding stress in the way he is being trained, then yes, I kind of have to take that 10-minute rule, and it's not a hard and fast rule. If I see a horse that I really believe is uncomfortable in his situation, and it's 8 minutes, then it's 8 minutes, and you have to step in. But you do have to look at the horse. The horses will tell you when they are uncomfortable and they are stressed. And it is not an easy situation, because that is the time that really everyone tends to disappear. But as a steward, you have to have a lot of courage of conviction, I think is probably the best way to say it. And Joelle, I don't know if you have other experience.
No, definitely. And I'm not the one to not intervene then. I can't. It's stronger than I am, and then I have to go and speak to the trainer or to the groom or to the parents who are standing around and tell them that we might change something, and then do it in a nice way, but calm down your rider a little bit. Yeah.
And that's the responsibility of being the chief of the team, you know, and in a non-championship, usually, not always, but usually your chief steward is a level 2. So if you're doing a series of competitions like Florida, 1 week you might be on the team, 1 week you might be the chief. It's probably better for the riders to not necessarily understand which role you're playing unless they look at the wall. But if you're on the stewarding team and you have an issue, you can make the first little knock. After that, it goes on to the chief. So it's certainly an additional responsibility when you are the chief steward for the competition.
Okay. There is another bullet here that says that you're an aid and resource for the judges. I can say that's very true. Could you talk a little bit about your relation with the judges, how you interact with the judges, and in what moments you have to go and tell them what's going on specifically, like usually, you know, as a general rule?
Well, first I would say that it is important, and it's certainly been an improving situation over the last few years, and I have to credit Jacques Van Dale for this, is that the stewards are FEI officials. Sometimes they're not seen to be in the same team as the judges or the veterinary delegate. I think that's gotten a lot better in the last few years. Just as we are an aid and resource for the organizers and supposed to be an aid and resource for the athletes, for the judges, sometimes a judge will run into a situation where they're not sure of a rule, and then the steward is expected to be the walking rule book. Generally speaking, however, once a competition has started, if I'm having an interaction with the judge at sea, it's either because there has been a situation in the schooling area that is going to have an impact upon the schedule, or we've found something in the equipment check, either blood at the mouth or on the sides, or even blood somewhere else, which may not have an impact upon whether or not the competitor is eliminated from the ride, but we still have to go into the judge and discuss it. In the larger competitions where you have signaling between the judges, every once in a while we'll have a situation where one signal was not seen, or there's incorrect equipment in the ring. So those are the times when we have to march from our steward station in the warm-up to the judge. Joelle?
Yes, I really agree about the thankfulness towards Jacques Van Dale, the work he has done for the stewards, because I really feel a lot of respect coming from the judges for our work. Very often you hear them telling you, oh wow, you have such long days and a different work, and wow. No, I think we have very, very good relationship now with our judges.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I have to say, and Lisa, probably you were there, the last IDOC meetings, I remember exactly the one the year before, last year in Frankfurt. He's always, Jacques Van Dale, he's always advocating for the status of the stewards, and I think I agree with you too that he's done a wonderful job, because you're very, very important for the shows and for the correct functioning of a horse show. Okay, so let's go. Well, there was one thing that I missed there. I'm going back, and that is supervision of stabling. And there has been, especially in Europe, I think, and this one will go to Joelle, especially jumping riders are criticizing a lot all the measures that have been taken against doping and all the doping decisions from the FEI tribunal.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the same time, they said, well, but the conditions of the stabling are not so good, and the security in the stabling is not so good. So how can you pretend that the PRs are responsible if the security of the stables is not good enough? So what do you think about that whole discussion?
Yeah, there's a lot of discussions going on about that for the moment. For sure, it depends on the level of the competitions. 1-star, 2-star, 3-star, or 5-star, for sure. But I think there must be an improvement. We need an improvement there because the security at shows of a lower level are not that good as they should be. I agree. I can understand the riders, especially when we come to doping stories, for sure. And I know that they're really going for it now, the jumping riders. They ask for much more security in the stables and around, and less accreditations given to the riders and their entourage and all that. Yes, I agree. There must be something done. Yeah, definitely.
Okay. And Lisa, what do you think?
Well, I would certainly agree. And as Joelle pointed out, it's the requirements for security and stablings increases as the level of stars go up. And once you have one that is smaller and of a lower rating, it is an expense for organizers, certainly. The aspect of 24-hour stabling security is an expense. We are fortunate in that we can often use special stewards who are there in the evenings and are checking the horses regularly. At the championships, of course, we have entire stewarding teams and often veterinary teams that are checking the horses at night. But I realize it is an expense. And as Joelle pointed out, there is a problem with so many people in the stables. Everybody wants to have access to the stables, and it makes it very difficult. But it does emphasize the importance for the simple things like the emergency information on the horse's stall that seems to be a daily, weekly, season-long fight to get people to fill out. We ask for it for a reason, and we do want to know who should be there. That's why I really like the photographs on the accreditation, because it does make it a little bit easier. But security staff at a horse show, for the stewards and for the athletes, is worth its weight in gold.
Okay, so Lisa, you were mentioning that you were a tack owner for many years, so you know a lot about that. There's one thing that always concerns me, is that the people in the industry are all the time coming out with new beads, with new bridles, with new saddle pads, with new saddles, with new spurs, with new everything. How do you handle that? Because it is impossible for the rules to include everything. So how do you deal with that? And where could the riders and trainers go to assess whether or not a piece of equipment can be used or not?
Well, first of all, it is, as I said, I don't consider myself an expert, but I'm a specialist. It's of interest to me. I'm involved with the U.S. Equestrian writing of rules and what we call Annex A, which is a very good photographic representation of what is permitted and what is not. I will say the same thing to international competitors that I say to national competitors, and that is, it is amazing to me that in such a detailed, expensive, time-consuming sport, that so few people ever look at the rules. If you talk to a golfer or a tennis player, you know, they know every little fault thing. If you talk to the typical horse person, they say, oh, it's too long. And that's the end of it. I would say that, and let's see, it's 2029. In 2018, the FEI did a major overhaul of the way they presented the rule for equipment for dressage, and it made it much more clear. In some respects, I like it because they took some of the drawings that we use for the U.S. equestrian rules, which we'd spent a lot of time on, so we were happy to share those internationally. I think that has improved it. There is, if you look at the FEI rules, they've made it a little more simple so that you don't have to understand quite so much by adding drawings of the cheek pieces that are permitted, and then drawings of the mouth pieces that permitted. And if you have this is permitted and this is permitted, and you put them together, then that's permitted. The number one thing, however, would be read the rule book. But yes, I would say in the last probably 6 or 7 years, it seems more that the equipment manufacturers are dragging the sport along rather than the way it was always before, and that is there were certain specifications for equipment and people made equipment to go to those specifications. So it is a challenging time. If you're not really involved in tech and equipment, I would think life would be very confusing, because it's kind of confusing to me and I still deal with it every day.
Yeah, I think that we don't have that many problems with dressage bits. They are not so difficult than for jumpers, for example, jumping much more complicated with bits. I'm very happy that now we have WhatsApp groups with stewards. So if you have a problem, you just take a picture of it and you put it in your group, and 5 seconds later you have the answer when you're not really sure about it. So I love it. It's fantastic. But coming to bits, I was a little bit surprised or concerned about something I realized when I was at one of the last shows, that especially not in the Grand Prix class, but in the other classes, we don't have that basic knowledge anymore, because we had bits the wrong way around, spurs the wrong way around, not well-fitting saddles, and I was a little bit concerned about that, I must say.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I have a question now from the audience, and the question is the following: what are the rules most commonly broken that surprise the riders? In your experience, what would you say that the answer for that is? Whips?
Rules they should know, or rules that surprise them?
Rules that they should know, they break, and they get surprised because they didn't even know that existed.
Well,
okay.
Go ahead, Joelle.
Yeah, I think that the whip story, that is really a good one. Definitely. You have them every show, and very funny, sometimes always the same people trying again, and then it's like, oh, stupid me again, I took the wrong whip. So yeah, it's kind of a game nowadays. Yeah, the whip story.
I would say that the very basic one, as I mentioned before, when you get to the competition, if you look at the map that tells you where you can go and how you get there, that seems to be one that every competition, I have a couple people who tell me they had no idea that there was someplace they could go or someplace they could not go. That one, and lunging equipment,
mm-hmm.
They're usually a little concerned about lunging equipment as to whether or not, or what kind of side range you can use, direct or triangle, and nothing that's... Once a season, I have somebody who uses a Pessoa lunging system at home and gets great results, so they want to use that at the competition and don't understand why they cannot. Or someone who is lunging in a double bridle and forgets and attaches the lunge line to the curb. I get that one every once in a while. It's if they read the rules, perhaps they would know a little more. I've seen you've gone on to the next slide. Okay.
So I think we have to take about blood with this one.
Yeah.
So what are your views on that, and what's your experience with that?
Well, my views on that is that at no time is blood appropriate.
That's correct.
Blood happens sometimes. Blood can happen for many reasons. Blood can happen from abusive riding, certainly. It can happen from spurs used incorrectly, of course. I would say in my years as a steward, my experiences with blood have been, I'm trying to think of anyone that wasn't, either an accidental, not bitting issue, not rough hand issue, but an accidental time when a horse cuts its tongue, bites its tongue, and it's not been an issue of rough hands where they get the curb hooked. I don't run into that. I've seen it before, but I've not run into it as an official. But it's been the horse that accidentally bites its tongue, which is what I think happened in this particular photo. And unfortunately, the tongue is a very vascular muscle, so it shows up instantly. And unfortunately, even though it's an accidental thing, if there's blood in the mouth when we do the equipment check, or certainly if the judge sees it in the ring, it is grounds for elimination without protest or question. Most of the blood I see on the side of a horse is due to an accidental nick, but sometimes it's due to riders who think that more spur with a leg that is not as educated as it should be is going to make the horse go. And again,
there's a question from one of the participants. Would you take into consideration an allergy or blood is blood?
Well, I've never seen an allergy happen on the side. If it is a situation where, let's see, an allergy that's maybe caused a nosebleed, I don't get to make that decision.
Yeah, I think that's the moment to call the vet to check it with you. And I think the first question is a horse with an allergy fit to compete? Should he be on the showground?
Yeah. If it's something that's discovered in the equipment check where it is blood that is not on the mouth or not on the sides, the veterinary delegate has the opportunity to discuss with the judge whether or not the horse is in his or her opinion fit to go on in competition. It's not the steward's call, it's the steward's responsibility to see it and report it. But as stewards, we do not get to make the call on why unless it's an environmental fly bite up here on the crest on a gray horse, but or any other hot horse. But if it's in the mouth or it's on the sides, it's not something that we get to decide whether or not it's an issue or not.
Okay, there's another question here. Would you allow the horse to come back as the last rider after it bits its tongue and after it stopped bleeding?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Would you allow, let's say you see the blood, then the question is, would you allow the horse to come back as the last rider after it bit its tongue and after it stopped bleeding? Probably that's a question more for a judge.
Okay.
I wouldn't,
Yeah,
of course.
Yeah. I mean, every once in a while you see a horse that's on deck and that's, had a little incident because you can tell from the team over there that's suddenly hurried around the horse. And the only thing that you can tell the competitor is if it's a little minor thing that happens right before they go in the ride and they can stop the blood and they can go in and it doesn't bleed, then that was their day. If they choose to go in and it starts to bleed again, there's nothing that the steward can do on their behalf that says, oh, that happened before, and that's again not our call. As far as something as a horse that's eliminated due for blood, or that has an issue beforehand, it's not the steward's call to let them go at the end of the class, and there's no provision in the FEI rules that would allow a judge to do that I can think of, but Cesar, you would certainly know that better than I.
Oh, that's very clear. There's no way you can do that.
Yeah.
Okay, so then the other thing I would like to ask is, have you had any problems with behavior of riders in the stalls while the competitions are going on that have required your attention or that have given that have ended in your giving yellow cards?
Well, I would say that the most common problems that I have encountered in the stabling is a smoker who just cannot stop doing that in the barn.
Yeah.
And as a non-smoker, I have absolutely no sympathy whatsoever, but that happens periodically. And there are times in championship competitions, only at those so far, fortunately, where we have had some issues where the question of free access to water has been a question for horses. And that has been dealt with in a way that one time has a yellow card and several other times where it got very close to a yellow card, but the yellow card was the instrument that made the understanding of the problem truly hit home, that the horses must, in fact, have access to water. Otherwise, in the stabling, I have not had too many problems other than the silly things like, you know, where you park your car in a fire lane. It's things that if they were really thinking and not so focused on what they're doing for the competition, that they would probably never do when they were not. Sometimes you get one that's a little too focused, but I've not had too many yellow card situations with that. I don't know if you have different experience, Joelle.
No, I agree, absolutely agree with that. And I think especially at the championships, the riders are now very aware that we are around in the stables, and most of them, they know us now. And so yeah, I think in the stables, it's very fine now. I think it's important for us to have the grooms on our side, that they trust us. That's a very important point for me also.
I think one thing that riders sometimes do not understand is that it may seem logical to them that if they have not accounted for proper facilities for having water for their horses, that the steward that's doing the barn check can just water their horse. And we're not allowed to do that. We're not allowed to go into the stalls. We can observe, we can look at the card that we hope is filled out. It's, you know, eventually we can find the information, but if a horse is in trouble, we don't want to have to go back and find the show office that's locked up to find the information for the contact information for the horse. But the stewards are not allowed to go in and make their own decisions in the stall with a horse. We are specifically prohibited from doing that.
I have a person that came in a little bit late and apologizes, but he wants to ask if you have had the issue of a trainer using the whip from the ground, for instance, to help with the piaffe, and how you react to that and what the consequences would be.
I've only had it once, and I became, since I'm not terribly tall of stature, apparently I can become very tall very quickly. And it stopped immediately. And because it only happened almost once, it went away, and we didn't have to do anything other than to make it very clear that should never happen in my sight again, ever. But I've not had more than that.
Joelle?
No, it's very clear in the rules that it is not allowed, so no discussion about that. I had it once at the competition that somebody was walking a horse and having a very long whip in his hand and doing a kind of hand working the horse. So we had a nice conversation about what is hand working and what is walking a horse, and then it was fine.
I have another question here.
Okay.
It's about neurocryotherapy. Is that allowed during competition? That is the question.
Cryotherapy? Are you talking about the equipment that is allowed to be cold but not below zero? I mean, there are very specific rules in that. Yes, it is. For dressage, it is permitted, but it is only permitted as long as the temperature is not below zero. And there have to be specific controls on the equipment for that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is that what I'm not sure if that's what you were asking.
Yeah, the question was, Valerie used Valerie is one of our participants, and she used the word neurocryotherapy. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correct or not. Maybe after we finish, we can talk about it, and we'll give her the microphone, okay?
Sure, yep.
So we have already talked about the check of the equipment, but what do you usually find wrong with riders when you check for the equipment in your competitions, both of you? Is there any particular thing that the Times is wrong?
Typically, the ones that are a little frustrating. Well, before they allowed fly hoods that had thicker material for noise cancellation, that used to be an issue. But now that that's permitted, that's not a problem. You do still have to check for earplugs, which are only permitted for prize givings. But it seems to me mostly to be silly stuff, like once a year they clean their spurs and they put them on upside down. Or, you know, and the bits are often, if we say a bit is backwards, people look at, think, how in the world can you put a bit in backwards or upside down? But it's super technically not illegal if you have a bit that has an arrow on the left side that's supposed to be pointing forward. It is not a legal issue, although I always point it out if they have the bit on the right side. Although every once in a while a competitor says, oh, that's the way the horse goes well in that. But I find the most frustrating thing with equipment checks, if there is something wrong, 9 times out of 10, the groom gets blamed, which I always find interesting because they are, after all, the person responsible. But I would prefer that the riders check their own equipment and not blame those poor grooms who put things on wrong, supposedly. Joelle?
Yeah, definitely. And I'm quite happy to hear that we get the same answers both sides of the big ocean.
I will share one funny thing, and I won't tell you who said it to me because that would not be fair, but it sticks in my mind every time I check a horse, because it was when they first started the specifics of what was allowed for the FEI and how tight it could be. And after the ride, everyone was congratulating the rider because it was a wonderful ride, and she looked down at me and she said, and don't tell me my noseband's too tight. It wasn't, but that one sticks with me. So,
I remember.
yeah.
Okay, so unfortunately, sometimes you have to go to the yellow cards. Could you explain a little bit about why do you give them, when do you give them, and what are the rights of the riders?
The dreaded yellow card is generally given for some semblance of incorrect behavior. So it is not something that, as I mentioned before, rises immediately to the level of a gross rule violation, like, oh, I don't even want to go there. Big things. Incorrect behavior can be a number of things. It could be failure to show up for an award ceremony on time. It could be any of the myriad of things we have mentioned that ends up as being the responsibility of the person responsible, but it could be sharing of credentials. It could be incorrect equipment in some cases. It is not something that an FEI rider wants to have, because once you receive one in a season, it stays with you. And if you get 2, then it automatically goes up to traffic court.
Yeah.
Joelle?
Yeah, and it stays with you for a year. So you're on the list for a year, and this is not what you want to have. So
yeah. If you have 2 in a year, then you get a suspension.
That's it.
So, but it's, you know, that I hope that athletes and trainers do not feel that that we have a contest to see who can give out the most yellow cards in a season. I dread giving out yellow cards. I like a season where I have to give none, and I think that I've perhaps missed something I could have caught to prevent it, although I don't think that's actually the case, but I might have missed something that I could have done to prevent someone having a yellow card, because I don't like giving them.
When I had to give my first one, I think I slept as bad as the rider did the night after. It was a nightmare for me also. Nobody wants to give yellow cards, I think. So
No.
Okay, so I think more or less within the time, we're 13 minutes ahead, but I think we were able to cover most of the topics. Is there anything you want to say before we finalize the chat, you two, Lisa and Joelle?
I would say that one thing that our sport needs is more stewards, more people interested in stewarding. Joelle started when she talked about how she got into stewarding, was judging was not for her. I guess I decided even before that because I really never even pursued it, but I like, we operate in the back of the house, and particularly riders who are either not competing for some reason or have decided that they want to have an experience that's a different part of the sport. Stewarding is wonderful. We have the same community of all officials, but the same community that judges had. It's a little more difficult for stewards depending upon the country that you're from as to how much international experience you have. The best thing I've had as far as stewarding is I've had an opportunity to do 2 Pan Am Games and the Olympics and the World Cup, and now I have an international family. I can ask questions of my international peers, and I get a lot of questions from my international peers. So that's a wonderful thing. So I would strongly encourage anyone who thinks that they are interested in it to explore an additional career in stewarding. Now, saying that as an additional career of stewarding, it is only fair to give the disclaimer that that is not how one finds their way to fame and fortune, because we do have the same €125 official compensation as our per diem. So it's not really a way to find fame and fortune, but it is a wonderful way to give back to the sport and participate in the sport, particularly after, I as a rider have competed for many, many years and to the FEI level, but never in a high performance environment. So my experience is very long, but very national. But it has given me a wonderful opportunity to some extent to travel, but certainly to meet a lot of wonderful people. So I would encourage that.
Thank you very much, Lisa. And Joelle, any final thing?
I absolutely agree. It's about meeting people from all over the world. You have friends all over the world. Every show you meet new people, you make new friends. And for me personally, it's a little bit like, I feel sometimes like being the missing link between the riders and the organizers and all the officials, because I know both sides of the medal. So I think, yeah, that gives me something. I can give something back to the riders, to the sport. So that's what I love about it. So yeah, being a steward, for me, it was the right choice. I'm very happy about it. Yeah. And thank you, Cesar, for giving us this opportunity, because now we realize how much we miss it. We miss the shows and the people, and yeah.
Okay, so before we finalize this, I just have one comment. Karen Vesperman says, as a newer judge, the stewards TDs have been very helpful and supportive. They're a good resource for judges. I totally agree. And we all the time learn from you. And then Amy is asking, for someone who's new to recognized shows and doesn't have a horse ready to ride yet, is stewarding a way to get more experience?
Internationally, yes, it could be because of the introductory level, which is the level 1. I would say if this is a national question, certainly every competition needs volunteers across the board. And if you think that stewarding is something that you eventually would be interested in, developing your stable management skills would be an excellent introduction to stewarding.
Okay, so, well, I think you have been very nice with us with the time. We had some more questions, but I think we have to finish for the time being. Thanks a lot for accepting this invitation. I hope I can have you here again. I'm really enjoying these dressage talks. I also get to meet people from all over around the world, like in the shows, and we're all learning. And well, in these difficult times, we can also take the opportunity to learn a little bit more and to stay in touch with wonderful friends like you two are, and that I have known for so many years. So thank you very much. And if people want to stay and talk a little bit and ask questions, I'll be happy to stay here and cooperate for that. Okay? But for the
Okay.
time being, I will finish the recording, and then we can go on with an informal chat, and I will give the microphone to everyone that wants it. So if you want to ask a question, ask me, and I'll give you the microphone. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you for showing the stewarding some love in your dressage talks.
Thank you very much. Take care of you. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.